The Toronto Raptors made the incredibly bold move at the trade deadline by acquiring Brandon Ingram, who's undoubtedly a great player, but is he the right fit for this current roster? We'll break it down in today's video. Let's get into it. Welcome back, everybody. This is Amateur Sports, the YouTube channel dedicated to Toronto Raptors content in live streams and in videos just like this one. If you enjoy along the way, then make sure you do hit that like button and subscribe for more content just like it. We're on the road to 20,000 subs in 2025, and you get great Raptors content in return. And today's focus is Brandon Ingram stylistically as a fit with the Raptors. And the previous video was an immediate reaction to the Brandon Ingram acquisition as far as the assets that went out, what Brandon Ingram kind of brought as a player, but we didn't really dig into his fit overall with the team, and that is exactly what we're going to be doing in today's video, discussing if some current players need to be traded away for this to really actually work. But for Brandon Ingram, of course, we'll recap the trade for anybody who may have missed it, but the Raptors parted ways with Bruce Brown, who was an expiring contract. Kelly Olynyk, who had a year left on his contract, had another year left on his contract. It wasn't a great contract, so nice to get off of that. And a 2026 first-round pick via the Indiana Pacers, which I would estimate would land in the 18 to 25 range conservatively in that 2026 draft. So a decently late first-round pick with two guys that, like, one was expiring, one the Raptors probably didn't want to pay next season. Overall, for a player of Brandon Ingram's caliber, who has been an all-star previously, that is a good pickup. And statistically, like, when you look at what Brandon Ingram has wrought over the years with the New Orleans Pelicans, it's pretty clear to see, like, the Western Conference is competitive for these spots. Man, like, some of these statistics, like, you bring this to the Eastern Conference, I think we could very much see, if Brandon Ingram gets a good extension with the Raptors, I think we very much could see Brandon Ingram land on some all-star teams, and I think we will get the chance to see that because I'll preface this by saying, yes, Brandon Ingram is a UFA, unrestricted free agent. The Raptors would not have made this trade without having the extraordinary confidence that he is going to re-sign. So again, I keep saying it. Brandon Ingram's going to re-sign. Don't worry about it. But statistically, what has he brought this season with the Pelicans? Yes, he has been injured. Yes, he is currently injured, which also maybe lends a favor to the Raptors, who still could consider tanking for the rest of the season, even adding another piece to this team. But in the 18 games he played with the Pelicans, he averaged 22.2 points per game, has consistently been this 22, 23 point per game player with the Pelicans, but notably as well, 5.6 assists and 5.2 rebounds over the course of Brandon Ingram's time with the Pelicans. I think the playmaking goes a little bit underrated. He is consistently above 5 assists per game and pretty consistently in the mid-5s as far as that statistic is confirmed. So decently comfortable in sharing the ball, and with right now especially lots of mouths to feed on the Raptors, that's very nice to see, especially if you're going to be playing him in tandem with Scottie Barnes. We'll talk about that fit in just a moment. Going further down the list, Brandon Ingram is this season shooting 46.5% from the field. That's like slightly lower than what you should be able to expect from him over the course of a full season, but there it is. His three-point percentage this year is very nice, 37.4%, and what's awesome along with this stat, he's really upped his volume from there. He's taken 6.4 attempts from three a game. In the two seasons prior to this, he took 3.6 and 3.8 three-point attempts per game. So the fact that he's been able, like, I know it's only 18 games, but the fact that he was able to scale it up and still hit like this in that very small sample is good to see. But his consistency from three-point range in his time with the Pelicans has been 36 to 37% mostly. So good three-point shooter. Can he do it on bigger volume? That will be a bigger question, and I really want to see that volume increase with the Raptors, or at least stay near this level with the Raptors to provide some space to his teammates. Also, for the true shooting percentage, like, this is a guy who shoots in the mid-range a lot. Like, his bread and butter is taking shots in the mid-range, self-creation, mid-range shooting, this real bucket-getter type of player that I think the Raptors have been longing for. Still decently efficient true shooting percentage-wise, 56%. The two seasons prior to this have been better than that from a true shooting standpoint, but it's something that the Raptors can work with. But ultimately, when you're acquiring a player like Brandon Ingram, like, you're understanding exactly what this guy is. You know, I've been critical for over the number of years now about the mid-range shot in the NBA, how it's, for the lack of a better term, the mid-range shot's fading away for good reason. It's just not very efficient. So if you're like an NBA average player shooting 41 to 42% from mid-range, so let's say 42% just to give like further prove this point. A 42% mid-range shooter, which is about the NBA average, over 100 possessions will score 84 points from those shots. Now, if you are an average three-point shooter in the NBA, you're shooting around 32 to 33%. But let's just really add on to the point here. You can be a bad three-point shooter shooting 29% from three, and over 100 possessions, that's 87 points. So a 42% mid-range shooter is less valuable over 100 possessions from a points per possession basis than a 29% three-point shooter. Now, obviously, there's lots of caveats to that. For certain players, let's, for instance, take Pascal Siakam, because, that was the type of player with the Raptors that was a really good scorer, but did shoot quite a bit in mid-range. Some players need to have that extra element to their game, like a mid-range shot, to make it easier to do what they do best better. So for Siakam, that's getting to the rim. But if players don't anticipate him ever shooting in mid-range, then they will really bunker down in the paint. But the fact that he's capable of shooting NBA average from mid-range, it makes players want to go contest that a little bit more, which could lead to some extra space on the inside. That's kind of what the Raptors need to do with Scottie Barnes to find, but they need to do a bit of a better job in finding balance with the way he's been shooting from the mid-range lately. But for Brandon Ingram, this is his game. His game is built around mid-range shooting. He's been pretty efficient at doing that as well. In terms of the upper echelons of efficiency in the NBA, Brandon Ingram is not going to be that guy, but he's a quality mid-range shooter who can shoot in the high 40s from that range. And in acquiring Brandon Ingram, you have to have the understanding that that is going to be what he wants to do. The job for the Raptors is going to be making those mid-range shots easier for him to up those percentages, but also it will be to tinker his game slightly, maybe tailor a little bit more towards getting to the rim, which can lead to, higher percentage shots and getting fouled a little bit more often. Because even though he is a good free throw shooter who can shoot comfortably above 80%, doesn't take a ton of them for a player with this volume of shooting. So maybe a little bit more going to the rim to get better shots, to get fouled more often, to get to the free throw line more often, and also maybe a little bit more three-point shooting. But undeniably, where his game is going to be made is in those mid-range settings. And as we talked about with Scottie Barnes, that's right now where Barnes has been getting a lot of his action, for better or for worse. Lately, it's been for the worse, and it kind of feels like Barnes right now is settling for that mid-range shot. So we can compare Barnes like how he did for Siakam. Barnes, with his size and his traits and his basketball ability, should be getting to the rim a lot more than he has been as of late, and we'll do a deep dive in a later video during the All-Star break talking about Barnes and how his game needs to kind of shift back to what it was. But briefly explaining it here, he's not getting to the rim as much as he was, and he is shooting in the mid-range a lot more than he was. That mid-range shot, that turnaround two that Barnes has, that's good to have, but it shouldn't be what you're looking to get if you're a player like Scottie Barnes. Now, if you're a player like Brandon Ingram, who's much more efficient in mid-range, yeah, we can hunt those shots a bit more often. But for Barnes, his bread and butter should be getting to the rim. And then to take off the scent, if you will, to make players think, defenders think, oppositions think about what he might do, have that mid-range game in your back pocket to bring out in specific occasions just to add a little bit of diversity to his shot diet. But as of right now, it seems like Barnes is really comfortable shooting in mid-range. Coaches aren't stopping it, so it feels as though they are comfortable with him shooting in mid-range. That's going to be occupying very similar areas to what Brandon Ingram is doing. And on top of that, if I could choose between Barnes and Ingram taking that shot, I'm going to take Brandon Ingram all day because he's the better player at creating separation and the better player at knocking down those shots when he does have the opportunity to do so. This doesn't mean that Scottie Barnes is a bad player, but there is going to need to be some tinkering done to maximize the spaces for Brandon Ingram. And I think kind of getting Barnes away from that and more so giving Brandon Ingram the reliability as a scorer is going to help Barnes' game. Bobby Webster kind of said it best at the press conference after the trade deadline. He put it very bluntly and very simply, but it's true. Scottie wants to pass, Brandon wants to score, and Barnes is going to help ensure that there is easier places for Brandon Ingram to get his, and on with that happening, with the focus going towards Brandon Ingram, we've seen with Barnes this season, when Barnes is playing with RJ Barrett, he's a much better player. When the defense has to care about another player, Barnes has been better, and I think that if we see Brandon Ingram and Barnes in tandem, we're going to get a lot of that. Where there could be problems is just Brandon Ingram can shoot Like, am I going to classify him as a shooter? Not going to do that. I definitely can't classify Barnes as a shooter. There's just not a ton of shooting around the Raptors right now. So, filling in the cracks around the team, it's going to have to come from, like, what you're going to need to look for is shooting to space the floor for guys like Ingram, Barnes, so they can get their stuff inside the three-point line, and a little bit of defense, because Barnes has been, like, so good on defense this season. Terrific. Brandon Ingram's not a good defender, and maybe we're lacking in defense in other places as well. So the Barnes-Ingram fit, which is the most important part of everything, is not perfect, but I don't think it's bad. It's a little bit clunky, but with the right pieces around them, it can work and it can make sense. And we're going to have a lot of time to find those pieces to fill around these guys, because the suggestion is Brandon Ingram is going to be here long-term, is going to sign a long-term contract. Financially, what that looks like, we'll just have to wait and see. But I mentioned RJ Barrett, how well Barnes has played when Barrett is by his side. But does that change when it's Barrett and Ingram by his side? Like I said, the Barnes-Ingram fit is a little bit clunky, but it can be made to work with the right pieces around. There's definitely got to be some question marks if RJ Barrett is the right guy around there, because there is a player who absolutely wants to get to the rim a ton, and definitely, like, he can shoot. Not saying he can't. He can shoot, but I wouldn't classify him as a shooter. Like, is your definition of a shooter a guy who can shoot 35% plus from three? Mine's not. My definition of a good three-point shooter is somebody who needs to be contested on the outside. Like, if they're going to be an aggressive closeout when it's kicked out to him from the three-point line. For some, like, are they even going to allow that simple kick out to that player on the outside? Are they going to be right up on him when he has the ball at the three-point line? Like, does the defense need to care a lot about that player beyond the three-point line? That's really what classifies the shooters. You see guys like, sorry to send astray his way, but I see all these conversations with Patrick Williams from Raptors fans in the past of like, oh, he can shoot because he's a shooter. Look at his percentage. You shoot above 35%. Yeah, like when you're wide open every shot, I hope you can make 35% of those threes, because the defense doesn't really care if you take those shots. They're comfortable allowing you to take that shot. That's nice, you can hit 35%, but is that going to space the floor for your teammates? In the case of RJ Barrett, unfortunately, it is not. And even though I like RJ Barrett and think he's a great player, a trio to build around of Barnes, Barrett, and Ingram is going to be difficult. So down the line, I'm not quite sure exactly when it's going to happen, but I think it does make sense for the Raptors to shop Barrett and look for some assets that will help either immediately bring in shooting and defense, or assets that will help acquire that. And I don't exactly know what that trade is going to look like. A little bit hypocritical of me, because I always say, well, if you're going to say they should trade a guy, you need to know who they're going to trade for. Don't quite know what that's going to look like just yet, but if the Barnes and Ingram fit is kind of clunky but can be worked out, the Barnes, Ingram, and Barrett fit is very clunky. And the reason why it's Barrett that I would trade over Immanuel Quickley. First of all, it's easier to trade a contract like RJ Barrett's. I'm not sure the Ingram, the Quickley contract, is going to be extraordinarily desirable. And Quickley is a player that does fit next to those guys as a shooter and as a creator. So it makes more sense to, I think, stylistically to have him on the team. And on top of that, it's easier to trade Barrett. Again, I like Barrett. I'm not saying I don't. It's just, you've acquired Ingram. You've kind of staked yourself in building around Barnes and Ingram. I just don't see it quite working with a guy who needs to get to the rim as much as Barrett, who constricts the space for the guys that you want to have more of the ball in their hands, being Scottie Barnes and Brandon Ingram. So what needs to change for this to work? There needs to be less of a reliance from Scottie Barnes in mid-range, and we'll touch on that even further in a future video. And for Brandon Ingram, like, we'll use RJ Barrett as an example. Like, there were qualities there in New York that were heightened when he came to the Raptors. And I think the Raptors view Brandon Ingram, who is like just getting started with his prime years, I think the Raptors view Brandon Ingram as not a completed product either, but as a player who can still develop and still get to the next level. And with a full offseason with the Raptors ahead to work on that, the Raptors should have expectations to be a playoff team next season. Is it going to be a contender out the gate? Very likely it is not. But contention takes time. You're going to see what you have in Barnes and Ingram. Maybe an RJ trade doesn't happen right away. You see if that works out. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it does work. Maybe there's a way to make that work. But you slowly find the right pieces through drafts and through trades to work around them to make this core what you want it to look like on the floor. But like ability-wise, this team should be fully capable of making the playoffs next season and slowly building themselves up. Again, it's on the front office to find the right pieces to put around them. But I think that this is a great platform to start with, and I'm really excited to see what they can do to build around the likes of Ingram and Barnes going forward, because this is two very talented players who, out the gate, it seems like they're going to get along really well. Barnes wants to make life easier for another guy like Ingram, and I think Ingram will relish having that and kind of being the main scorer for this team. So it doesn't really matter who the best player is. They're both fantastic players, but I think Ingram's going to be taking the reins as a scorer. I think Barnes is extremely comfortable with that happening. So I can very much see this working out, but a little bit more work is needed to be done by the front office. But what do you make of Barnes and Ingram? Do you think this will work with RJ Barrett? All of your thoughts on this situation, give me them in the comments down below. That's it for today's video. Drop a like if you did enjoy. Make sure you subscribe for more Raptors content like this, especially as we hope Brandon Ingram gets into action at some point this season. And we will see you again next time for another video.